And Diana's chosen a pretty controversial topic, the death penalty. So her goal is to present this perspective and help us talk about it and have a conversation. I saw John wrote down the time. So please help me welcome Diana Hutchenson with Reconsidering the Death Penalty.
Your perspective, your hostile perspective is you're for the death penalty. As far as controversial topics go, the death penalty is one that stirs up a lot of emotions. The main argument for capital punishment is to promote public safety. And I think we're all for public safety. There is evidence that some criminals have looked up the potential punishment before committing murder, and the argument goes that had there been death penalty in their state, it might have deterred them from committing murder. There's also an argument that criminals with life sentences have been released early due to overcrowding and gone on to commit other horrible crimes, rapes, and murders, and this would have been prevented had they been put to death. And then there's a question about sanctity of life, and at least one argument is that sanctity of life is not really preserved by giving someone life in prison versus the death penalty, because you can't really have a truly human life under the conditions in prison. So I think that there are many ways of thinking about why the death penalty has benefits. And today I want to go through some of these lines of thinking about the death penalty and give you some for and against arguments about some of the elements, about whether the death penalty really is effective in deterring crime, whether it's fair and equitable in how we hand it out, and the morality of the death penalty itself. So the first question is, does the death penalty deter people from committing crimes? In my research, I found this to be a very common sense argument. That of course, since criminals are always fighting against getting the death penalty, and a fear of death is a very powerful motivator, that having this as the ultimate punishment will deter criminals. Well, in the US, we actually have a really interesting possibility to study state-by-state comparison, because some states have the death penalty and some don't. And we also have some states that have had the death penalty and then have abolished it. The ACLU writes that states that have the death penalty laws do not have a lower crime rates or murder rates than states without such laws. And states that have abolished capital punishment show no significant change in either crime or murder rates. The death penalty has no deterrent effect. Claims that each execution deters a certain number of murders has been thoroughly discredited by social science research. So I think even though we like to believe that the death penalty would be a deterrent, the facts show that it actually isn't. So the next question is the death penalty fair and equitable? And those who consider the death penalty the right way to go says that just because there are more minorities in prison, well, the crime rates are higher among minorities and poor people. So it makes sense that there would be more minorities and poor people in prison and on death row. It's just logical. And also now in a lot of places we have free public defenders, a lot of people throwing money into that system, so they have a chance for a good defense. It's not just they don't have any defense because they're indigent. Well, on the other side of this argument, Senator Russ Feingold wrote about a concern about the accuracy of who is put to death. And what he wrote was, since the reinstatement of the modern death penalty, 87 people have been freed from death row because they were later proven innocent. That is a demonstrated error rate of 1 innocent person for every 7 persons executed. When the consequences are life and death, we need to demand the same standard for our system of justice as we would for our airlines. It is a central pillar of our criminal justice system that it is better that many guilty people go free than 1 innocent should suffer. Let us reflect to ensure that we are being just. Let us pause to be certain we do not kill a single innocent person. That is really not too much to ask for a civilized society. So that's what Senator Feingold had to say. I think we also have this instinct ourselves that, if not personal experience, that justice is based to a certain extent on who your lawyers are and how much money you have. I have a friend who went to jail for 6 months for a DUI, and we've seen other people who seem to have multiple instances of DUIs who get community service or even a lower sentence. So it just doesn't seem like our justice is that equitable, and it does depend on who your lawyer is and how much you can pay. There's also evidence that the death rate sentencing rates go up just before elections when judges are trying to portray themselves as the law and order justices. Well, if our justice system were really fair, there would be no change in the rate of death penalty sentencing depending on the timing of elections. Activist Helen Prejean wrote, "Who pays the ultimate penalty for crimes? The poor. Who gets a death penalty? The poor. After all the rhetoric that goes on in legislative assemblies, in the end, when the net is cast out, it is the poor who are selected to die in this country. And why do poor people get the death penalty? It has everything to do with the kind of defense that they get. Money gets you good defense. That's why you'll never see O.J. Simpson on death row. As the saying goes, capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment." All right, so if we work to improve the accuracy and fairness of who is given the death penalty, there's still a question of how does the death penalty impact us as human beings? We have an instinct that the punishment should fit the crime. And the book of Exodus in the Bible even captures this idea of fairness for punishment, not having excessive punishments. It's written a life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and so forth. Along these same lines, the constitutional lawyer Bruce Fein made a point that the death penalty honors human dignity by treating the defendant as a free, moral actor able to control his own destiny for good or ill. It does not treat him as an animal with no moral sense. Continuing along these same lines of why it's morally okay to have a death penalty, a professor at the University of Texas, Jay Budziewski, wrote that society is justly ordered when each person receives what is due to him. Crime disturbs this just order, for the criminal takes from people their lives, peace, liberties, and worldly goods in order to give himself undeserved benefits. Deserved punishment protects society morally by restoring this just order, making the wrongdoer pay a price equivalent to the harm he has done. This retribution, not to be confused with revenge, is guided by a different motive. Well, the alternative that I'd like you to consider when it comes to the morality and how it impacts us as human beings comes from Brian Stevenson in his book, Just Mercy. He described the terrible impact of carrying out the death penalty on the workers in the criminal justice system. He made the point that we would never rape someone who committed rape because that would degrade us as human beings. And along the same lines, after witnessing the death penalty, he came to believe that killing another human being, even in a state-sanctioned system, similarly degrades those who have to carry out this sentence. Well, I hope today you've been able to reconsider some of your thoughts about the death penalty. As I shared with you how the death penalty really isn't effective as a deterrent. It's not used fairly and equitably, and it hurts us as human beings to carry it out. Now I welcome your questions. Alex, I know you're going to come up with something. Greg.
I am in favor of the death penalty for the class of criminal that fall into the heinous crimes category. About a dozen years ago, a guy in Florida kidnapped, raped, sodomized, and buried alive a 9-year-old girl. For him to breathe another breath, I think violates some moral code. And it doesn't matter to me that we be paying $36,000 a year to keep him in jail. And it doesn't matter that if the ACLU's argument is that if we put one person to death that doesn't deserve to be, that's morally wrong. I think if putting that guy that sodomized that 9-year-old girl to death deters one person from committing a heinous crime, it's worth it.
Mhm. And you know what, that's such a powerful instinct that we have to say, this person did something horrible and they should be put away, it gets closure to the family, it gets them from the possibility of ever being able to commit another crime, and it will deter others. But the facts are that it doesn't seem to deter other people. That the kind of people that are gonna commit that kind of crime don't stop and think, is this gonna cause me to get put to death? That's not what they're thinking when they're committing that crime.
That's a good point, because someone asked J. Edgar Hoover one time about someone that committed a heinous crime, and the reporter said, well, why do you think he did that? And J. Edgar Hoover's response was, well, if I knew that, you'd have to worry about me.
Yeah. Esther, did you have a question?
You mentioned that better defense costs more money, or words to that effect. But I didn't really hear you substantiate that. I think that public defenders in many cases, because they have a vast amount of experience, do a very good job of defending people that don't otherwise have means to hire their own lawyer. Can you expand on that? Do you have any other things to back that up, that people that can hire their own private attorney or even a team of attorneys are better defending themselves in court?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And you know, I think some lawyers who are not well paid do a great job at defending their clients because they know it's the right thing to do. So it's not strictly a matter of money, but I think that the overall evidence is that the more money people have to put into lawyers, the more time they have to put into it, they're going to get a better result. And Brian Stevenson was a lawyer that started the Southern Justice Defense Fund that goes to help argue for people who are on death row. And one of the people that he defended originally had public defenders, and the evidence against this man was so weak, and he, the people in the government totally set up this black man for this crime because they couldn't find another criminal and they needed to have it closed. And when you go back and you look at the evidence that no public defender even looked at basic things to protect this man who was clearly innocent. More stories like that, I think, just show the evidence that the more money you pay, usually the better result you get.
Here's an example not involving capital punishment, but you look at the Penn State situation and Jerry
Sandusky.
Sandusky.
Yeah. Sandusky.
I still didn't hear you.
Sandusky.
Jerry Sandusky.
Sandusky, yes. He's behind bars and probably will be for life. And no doubt he had the means to hire all the attorneys he could, but it didn't help him. The evidence was against him.
And you know, I think that's one good thing about our criminal justice system. While it's not perfect, I think it still has a lot of things in place so that when the evidence is overwhelming, and just as it should be, you know, in the case that Greg brought up earlier, if there's someone where there's so much evidence against them, and it's clear that they did commit this crime, then they should get punishment for it. And many times our justice system does work the way that it should, and people who do commit crimes get consequences for it.
My support of the death penalty is limited, but there are some people out there who are amorally and who you put them in jail, and if they ever got out again, they would be highly likely to repeat those crimes because they're just the current phase predators.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see, when we're clear about that they're that sort of person, that there's any reason we would want to maintain their lives, that the society saves money by having them not be paid for in jail, and it protects itself from the rare event visualized cities in Europe where everything flooded and all the animals got out of the zoo.
Mm-hmm.
and escapes to the problem in the streets.
Right.
I would
You know, and I think
support-
that is a fear that people have, that someone who is, clearly, we just can't understand that they don't seem to follow the same moral code as other people, and it doesn't feel safe to have them back out on the streets. The numbers actually seem to show that it costs more to put someone to death with the death penalty than to maintain them in prison. And I think that the chances of them actually getting out due to some natural disaster, well, we probably have bigger problems on our hands at that point. Yeah, all right, well, let's see, Alex, you had something?
What's the alternative?
You know, I think our alternative is life in prison, which isn't a very pleasant alternative, and as the one individual quoted, you're kind of taking away their humanity with that approach as well. So I don't feel like we have a lot of good alternatives, but I think that we would take away some of our own humanity by taking away their life is not a good approach either. Maybe leave them equipment that they could commit suicide in jail. I don't know.
So this is, it's theoretical, and you have some examples and everything, but if I brought it really back home, like, what if one of your children was murdered and that person was caught? What would you want to happen to that person?
And you know, I think that's an argument that touches all of us. Like, if someone we know was really, especially some of these horrible crimes, and if it happened to someone that we know, well, the stories that I've heard of people who have had someone get put in jail, get sentenced to the death penalty, it doesn't always bring them a sense of closure. They think it will. They think that that will make them feel better when this person is sentenced to death and they finally get what they deserve. But actually, some of the stories that I've read of people, they didn't have that sense of peace after that person. The thing that they had to do was to deal with that forgiveness and to deal with it personally and leave it up to God, not leave it up to us.
So what would you do then?
What would I do? Well, I would work to get them put in jail and locked up so they couldn't do that to somebody else, for sure. So thank you very much for your discussion today, and I hope I've given you an opportunity to reconsider the death penalty and where it has pros and cons, and it doesn't really deter people from committing crime. It's not really done fairly or equitably, and it degrades us as humans. So we need to keep looking for other alternatives to the death penalty.